Okay, so hello, Tissa. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic now that I'm here with you.
So I want to start off with a check-in, and a little bit of intro. So if you're watching this, welcome. This is a live series, a four-part series called Systemic Renewal that Otissa and I just thought, okay, well, why don't we partner? Both of our businesses are very similar. We'll explain. They complement each other, and they both deal with systemic change and restructuring. So one of the things, this is kind of a new phrase that I've been experimenting with, systemic renewal. And that is because I find myself kind of in the middle of the most radical activists and then the most like structured systems changers. And my personal perspective is that we don't necessarily have to throw away and burn down every single existing system. And in fact, that's going to cause us way more work. So what is a middle ground where we burn down and tear down certain systems that are just white supremacists in nature and that are just, they're done, they're dead, they're too old. And also, how do we see some existing systems and be like, wait, let's work together, let's collaborate, let's get multiple consultants on this and revive your existing organization or business. So that's kind of the overarching topic of this series. And then each week, we're going to talk about a different angle of systemic renewal. So this week, we're talking about workplace culture. And then there's a couple other topics like leadership structures, pay, and hiring, I believe. Those are all going to be talked about. So each Thursday at 12, you could tune in. The replays will be available on my coaching page.
Yay.
The intro.
Beautiful.
So Tissa, let's check in and just see, how do you feel about the word systems?
I like it. It's funny because a lot of folks would be like, oh, operations. And I'm like, yeah. Operations are awesome. But if you don't have any type of idea of how you want those to carry out, then calling it operations just sounds nice, right? Like, because for me, I have more questions like, okay, well, who's operating? Do they know how they're supposed to be doing that? And is this, you need a system. I know my brain just keeps going back to, okay, so what's the system that's set up? Like, you and I always talk about relaying what we do to the body. I'm sure people are like, what the heck does that mean? But, like you have different systems, like you have your endocrine system, you have these different systems of the body for the whole body to work. And so for me, if you want an organization to properly function, then you have to look at the systems that are in place. And sometimes there could be blockages, right? There could be something's not running as smoothly or circulating as quickly as it maybe needs to. And instead of looking at it from the person that's not doing something, sometimes you have to look at, were they set up for success? Was the system that's in place, is that really propelling them forward or is that hindering them? And let's figure that out together on how to fix it. So yeah, I like systems. To me, it makes a lot more sense than saying operations.
Yeah, I was going to say, so that's a yes. You like that word. But I like your explanation of just how it helps people identify bigger problems, because I do think it's work is so personal. It can get so personal, especially in nonprofits, when the work is so personal and people driven, that I've seen so many times organizations, their problems are the people. So-and-so is not doing enough, or so-and-so is leading terribly, or so-and-so is not paying me enough. But all the people, why are they making the actions that they're making? It's because they're within the system that's not efficient or not equitable.
Or none at all.
Yeah.
Like there's no system for pay rate increases. There's no system for reporting that their manager is not there's something wrong there. There's nothing to go by. There's nothing to fall back on, because everyone's been just flying out of the seat of their pants thinking that that's going to work for the long term. And you and I both know that that can only get you so far. And yeah, I just think that if we were to look at things from that way or that lens, I think it makes it a lot easier, because people want to blame game. And I think when you don't look at things from a system or overarching or bird's eye view, then it's easy to say, well, it's that person's fault.
Yeah.
you know, because like anytime people would complain to me, like, oh, so and so is not doing this right, blah blah blah. I'm like, well, who hired them? Right? Like especially if I'm helping them hire and that manager hired them. Well, no offense, this is up to you, my friend. Like, so figure out the solutions, figuring out maybe it's the tactics that are being used. There's more to the situation or story. And yes, there are moments where it is the person, but hopefully there's some things in place to help smooth that out. So yeah.
It makes me think about the difference, because I do think, I mean, systems problems are across the board, but one thing that extremely capitalist, hierarchical, white supremacist culture companies have figured out, a lot of them have figured out effective systems. I mean, like, that seems like a fact. Is it equitable? Probably not. Most likely not. But I think that when there is production on the line, especially of products, production of products, of like material goods,
Yes.
that is such a different driving factor for a lot of CEOs versus people when they're doing mission driven or good work. They don't see the need for those efficient systems to be working, because they're like, as long as we're doing the work and everything else will get figured out.
Yeah, that's a great thing that you brought that up. So, as a quick story, anyone listening, I like stories, so I'm sorry. I in college got to study a lot about the efficiency of assembly lines and how those things are working, and how we got started with creating systems, and what's efficient and what's not efficient, what's productive, how do you measure that, with workers, and how the history of this since, I would say probably before World War One, like when we had the huge huge production companies, and how that worked. And then of course later in life when women were in those factories, and how that all has changed and evolved. Or how in farming communities, how yes, you had men running the farms, but women were running the operations, right? Like making sure things were getting done. So throughout our time, we have perfected this way of running things. And yes, I think in a corporate setting, yes, they could be efficient, but I think that we are now wanting something different. We know, and also with technology, we don't have to think so much all of the time about things being produced as much as we did in the past. And I think as we get closer to the future, I think that's going to change completely. And so we have to think about the people. I think that we have to think about people systems, people ops, because that's what matters. And
futuristic.
Well, it's only just because that's always intriguing to me. And therefore, people are now they want more.
Yes.
Now they want to be heard and listened to. They want to have a discussion. They don't want to just be told to do something just because. They want to ask why. And I love when I work with clients and they get so upset, like the staff person is questioning my authority. Like, no. They just want to know more information. And I don't think that's bad, because I believe that we work harder when we're invested, and when we have a voice, and when we can be listened to. And here's the thing I tell folks all the time: the folks that you hire are technically the company's future. So wouldn't you want them to be invested in how you do things, because they probably know something that we could learn from. And yes, they got some things to learn too, and that's why we're giving them the opportunity. But let's be a little bit more open-minded of how this work relationship can go. So anyway, I just feel like, yes, those systems were working, but as we know that there's a shift happening. There's a shift happening in our world. So the systems have to shift. Yes. So they're not working anymore, right?
I feel like if I could put a phrase on it as you were talking, I'm like, the industrialization era was an era of dehumanization. Reading, writing, and arithmetic. You are a pawn in the system. We need factory workers who can put together these things because we're expanding. And now as we're moving out post-industrialization and in expanding human services, we're in a humanizing movement. And you and I are at the forefront in humanizing industries, dealing with people.
Yeah.
And people don't, it is funny how many times leaders and CEOs and EDs, they don't realize how much their current structures, even though their mission is to better humanity in whatever way, actually dehumanizing their staff by overworking them, by having policies that are ineffective and
or
rules
not
that
having any at all,
antique,
right? Or
or
not
not
having
nothing
any.
at all.
And I think too, it's like some folks that are in those positions, I think they really need to just kind of sit down and pause. A lot of the times I do tell people to do that. Like, maybe you should just, let's not keep doing and pushing. I know that, like, I know the pressure of when you're dealing with money and budgets and finances, and a lot of folks let that affect their actions within the organizations. And really, I think it should be the other way around. And also, like, like you and I talk about mindset, scarcity, right? And how that kind of keeps people in that, okay, I got to push people harder. They have to work harder because we need the money.
Yep.
We need the money. And I'm like, with nonprofits, I kind of chuckle because, like, well, you're always going to need money.
Yeah,
but
that's such a good point.
You're always going to need money. Money is always going to be a thing, but that's why you have I don't know if I'm allowed to cuss, but that's why you have a kick-ass development team, and you have a
You don't
kick-ass.
cuss on here. Yeah. I always cuss on these.
I figured, but I was like, man. But that's why you have a kick-ass team who is amazing at fundraising, amazing at donor relations. Like, you hire the people who are going to take that to the next level, so you don't have to worry so much. Maybe you have to focus on a few things like grants and timelines of those grants and all that, but you have a team of people who are going to focus on that, so you can focus on other things like investing into your staff, investing into your team, and strengthening those relations with internally, so you can do the amazing work you want to do externally, right?
Yeah. It makes me think of, so I've mainly been a nonprofit, different than you. I know you've been kind of in both arenas, or mainly company.
Yeah.
And the one company experience I had was with an airport bookstore company. I won't mention names. And I remember feeling like, for the first time, because I was not in a nonprofit, I was like, wait, I don't matter. I clock in and clock out, and they don't give two fucks if I leave or not. And so that completely changed my mentality. And I ended up only staying there for 6 months. But what I did notice behind the scenes, because my brain is strategic and creative, is just the system worked to a degree. Because it was a company, HR policies and procedures were clear as day. Pay was clear as day. At that point, I was getting paid 13 an hour. No, 11 an hour. And supervisors were paid 13 an hour.
Yep.
And I was like, that's bogus. Like, what the fuck? Why are we all here? But the empowering part of it was that I knew that I didn't matter. that was empowering, because I was like, I could sell these books like amazingly, or I could have a bad day and a little bit of an attitude, and I'm still going to get paid shitty $11 for this hour. So that was clear. And it was clear that this is how many days I could take off. And it was clear that this is what I do. This is what the supervisors do. And I don't have to do these things, but I do have to do these things, even though I never slept. And that is so missing in the nonprofit arena. Do you see that too?
I do. And well, I think that here's what I think. I think, again, I've only been doing this for a little bit. You've been doing this longer than me in nonprofit world, but I really think that folks sometimes get nervous with systems, and they get nervous with putting them in place because they feel like it's going to be restricting, or it's going to either, I don't know. I think that I'll tell you this. One thing about working with nonprofits is staff are lit up. Like, they are lit up and they're on fire, and not only about what they do, but about how it needs to be done, and what they deserve to get that done. It's so awesome and refreshing to work with a staff who are like, we want this, we want policies, we want a handbook, we want a pay rate scale. And I'm like, yeah, like they're fired up about it, because it's the opposite in a company that maybe has those things in place. The fire is different. You have maybe one staff member that's fighting for, a raise, but they don't fight for everybody else.
Yeah,
it's more individualistic. They fight for themselves. And a nonprofit staff are fighting for everyone. they want everyone to have
sometimes.
But for the most part, there's a majority that want to work together, and they want the things. Yeah. I think it's just being listened to and heard and considered is where that gets a little murky. But I think that a lot of people, they get nervous when you start implementing those structures, because they I think they think it, I think they feel like it's going to take away, right?
I feel like that's me. Like I could sit here and talk all day about systems with you from the outside. Like when I was just a little cog in the system, I was like, oh my gosh, this could be run even more effectively. And their people would be much happier if they did these things. But the actual implementation of the systems, I'm everything you just explained. I fear restraint. I fear more work. I fear more rules and obstacles.
Yeah.
But also, it's kind of like I feel the consequences of not having the system in place.
Yeah. And I think for me, it's like, I just want to completely change how we go about it. Like I was just talking to a friend last night about, this is going to relate, stay with me, teamwork and collaboration, and how watching shows like The Walking Dead and like The Vampire Diaries, because I love that show, how I love watching these shows, because you get to see the consequences of not working together
The zombies.
yeah, right, like, you know, or not having the same mission, or not having the same agreements, or not coming together and saying, this is what we're going to do, and let's figure out how to make this easier on ourselves. If that doesn't happen, if there's no buy-in, then it's worthless. So I think to handle those fears, I'm just going to label them as fears of putting systems and structures in place. It's more like, well, let's get the staff's buy-in.
That is so true and rare that's done well. And that's like one of those management practices that you just got to, like, we need all the CEOs and EDs to take this kind of a training with Otissa, because I think that is a big part of why I've been bitter so many times when EDs have said, well, we're doing this now, because one, they don't explain why, they just say we're doing it, no ifs, ands, buts about it. And two, it always means more work for me. And in some of the jobs, my schedule wasn't even, some of the jobs I had enough work time or enough free time. I was just used to the free time. And so I got bitter when I was like, oh, I have to do this extra thing. In other jobs, I did not have any free time at all. And you're asking me to do this other thing. So I feel like how I would want to explain it as a leader is, this is going to happen. And for a while, it's going to feel like more work because you're going to have to do this thing. But without this thing, there's this pain point. Y'all feel it? Yep. And so this is how we're going to alleviate that. We all need to do it. Even that would have helped my mind.
Yes, it's funny because I see this a lot. So like I was just talking to a client of mine about this with one of the staff members, and we talked about how what they wanted was a clear vision and path of where they're going and how that affects them and what that requires of them. And they want to know, you know, it's still buy-in, like all of like that's what they want. They want to know, okay, here's the map, this is the destination, and here's where we're trying to go. And yeah, it's going to be bumpy, it's going to be some turbulence, going to be a little weird, but I'm here with you and you're not alone. And here's how we're going to make sure that we're going to get through this together. And here's another piece that people forget. And we're going to celebrate when we can. We're going to celebrate even though we shouldn't be. Like when it's tough, when it's a really rough day, instead of working harder, I might let you go early because you've been putting in so much work the last 2 weeks. You know, like that's what I see that's missing. You hit every nail on the head there. You know, no direction, no vision, and no explanation for how what we're about to embark on is going to propel us forward, but how this is going to affect you in your areas or in your roles. And how I'm going to make sure we get through this together with as little damage as possible, but also to celebrate with you all and celebrate our milestones, or just celebrate because why not? Why not? Right?
I feel like people underestimate the role of vision in workplace culture transformation. And I feel that maybe as a pain point personally, because I do feel like that's a gift of mine, and it's been so underutilized or like exploited at times by other leaders, where it's like, I don't have the title or the hat, but they want me to explain the thing because they know I can sell it. They know I can get that the heart of the people. But it's like, to me, I mean, I can't execute and implement the systems part of things, the HR and all that, but the vision keeps the people moving. And I
Yeah.
feel like that's, it's kind of like a stereotype of a leader, but that's not really checked for fully in interviews.
Oh no, no,
You
no, not
know?
at all. And here's the thing is, I think that I can hear someone in their brains just be like, well, how do you check for that? Easy. You ask them, hey, you're going to be in this leadership role. So what, with limited information, knowing that it's very limited, what would be your vision to make these changes that staff want? How would you implement this? Or the organization's wanting to do this change in a few years. How would you guide the staff on this? What is your vision for this department? If you know that this is the problem, it's not difficult. It's a scenario based question. So now you got me talking about interviews, but it's just really, it's, I think a lot of folks, they put people in roles for the wrong reasons. I think that again, like, defining what a leader is and what the organization needs from that leader and what the staff really need to help them. Those are like what 3-4 different things. And notice I'm not talking about roles and responsibilities.
Yeah.
That's a different thing. That's carrying out the stuff I just listed. And I think that that's the problems I see over and over and over again is a lot of CEOs or a lot of EDs or whatever, they're good at the doing, or they're good at, or they're good at pushing people to do, right?
Yep.
But some of them, they lack some of those other skill sets. I think that that's because no one thinks of a leader in that way most of the time.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of something that's kind of like a little tangential when it comes to workplace culture. I feel like people have so many different ideas of what healthy workplace culture is. And I feel like there's a stereotype out there that it's like everybody's going to be smiling when they come into work.
Sorry,
Everyone's going to know each other's names. They're going to be paid like a fair amount. Like there's maybe less sexist and racist things said on a daily basis. But it's so much deeper than that. What do you think healthy workplace culture actually is?
Well, I think that if I'm being blunt, define that. Like each organization, define what that means. Ask people what that means. But anyway, don't get me on that. I think psychological safety has to be part of a healthy workplace culture, because if you don't have that, well, you're just going to have your standard, kind of like how you were feeling at that old job selling books, right? You're just a cog in the wheel. You're just, and hey, sometimes that is the case depending on the company and the job, but psychological safety. And I think too, like really making sure that you are providing a safe space, because a lot of the times when people think about working, well, even if it applies to remote too, I think that sometimes, because now workplace cultures are looking very different than they did before.
Yep.
Right.
Where you're in
it's really different because you worked 9 to 5 or 8 to 4 and you had your office and your little desk. So there was a physical safety element that HR has to always think about, right? But I think when you're remote, I think there's the psychological piece and making sure that people feel, how I love how you check in every time we talk. You always check in, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And I did the same thing as an HR manager with my staff. They'd come to me with problems. I'm like, yeah, we'll get to that. How are you doing? How are you feeling today? What's happening in your life? How was your weekend if it was a Monday? I would do rounds with folks, checking in on them, just saying, hey, how you doing? I never expected everyone to be jolly and excited and happy to be here, because hell, we're humans and we have days. But I want to provide that safety of, you can be your authentic self here while you do your job. And it's okay if you're having a rough day. Just be sure that you communicate that and not take it out on other people, right? Or not take it out on the client or whatever. So I think we just forget about the psychological safety and how do you carry that out as a manager, and how does that look like when you are in a different role? I think that's really important to me. And then also, like, what is the culture like? Is it normal to be friendly and smiley and jolly? Is that normal? Or maybe they're engineers and they keep to themselves and they engage when they want to engage, and that can be okay too. I just feel like really kind of defining and creating what does that look like. But if we're talking about health and being healthy, I think psychological safety, encouraging folks to listen, encourage them to speak up, but making sure that they're saying things in a way that, making sure that they're being mindful of the delivery of when they're talking to someone, right? All these different elements I think are extremely important for a healthy workplace. And that's just a little bit. I'm trying to slow down my rant, but.
Well, I feel like the psychological safety piece ties right into DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one thing that I used to try to explain to clients is that you don't have to do this. You could keep doing business as usual and not analyze the way you've internalized oppression, sexism, racism, ableism, cis sexism, all the things. But if you continue that route, it's these minute, quick instances that are creating a lack of psychological safety for many people within your organization or business. And over time, that's going to lead to bitterness. That's going to lead to a lack of retention.
Yes.
It's like
turnover.
A leaking.
Yep.
It's a leak. It's a leak in the system if you're not doing something to analyze that.
Which is costly. That's the thing. Yeah, it's costly.
There's so many times when I've experienced, in the blink of an eye, I went from feeling good in a space to feeling completely unsafe and just majorly misunderstood, of like, oh my God, I thought that they understood this about me. This whole time, this is how they define what a Latina is, or this whole time they've been having these like internalized sexist ideals that have made them decide this for me. So I think that the more privileged you are, the less you realize how much that's happening and how much the oppressed people in the space, the most oppressed people especially, are not going to say anything if they feel like their job is on the line.
100%. And I think that that's the biggest problem. And I think that a lot of folks that are in a leadership role that do have privilege, I think that it's imperative for them to really do work around this, do work around DEIJ, do work around psychological safety, understanding the importance of their relationships with their juniors or with their staff or with their team. Too many times I think that a lot of folks, they do not care to think about those things because they're so focused on blah, insert reason here. They're not like, I like not touching hair. Like it's like I use this example all the time, being a Black woman and being in a space, I've had to always deal with this. To me, it's silly, especially when you're an HR manager who's enforcing rules and not wanting harassment or anything like that. And then someone just touches your hair and not understanding that is just as bad as touching any other part of my body, and someone who is of privilege, who happens to be white, who happens to be above me, and being in those situations, right? It's uncomfortable, it's awkward. And I bet you that person never thought about that being a problem. Mm-hmm. They only focused on how they felt when I told them, don't touch my hair. Right?
Yeah. And I feel like when we are talking to organizations, when I've talked to organizations, the assumption is by leadership, by different people, is that we are asking you to be perfect. And you can never do a microaggression. And these are the ways that you need consequences in case people do something. Like they think that that's the ask, but the ask is not that. It's to address the underlying current that's okay, and to change that. When the underlying current is oppression is not okay here, then of course mistakes are going to be made, but then there's space to call it out without fearing losing your job.
Yes. Change the default. The default. The default now is express your concerns when you're uncomfortable, regardless of the position you are in.
And the workplace culture, it's not gonna change overnight. And there's inevitably always a walking on eggshells phase.
Yes. Oh yes, right? For everybody.
When it comes to personal relationships with family or friends or significant others, we recognize walking on eggshells as part of oh, we had a conflict, it's going to feel a little weird today, right? But then you move through it.
Yes.
But organizations, because of conflict avoidance, this white supremacy culture trait, they're like, no, 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 this means bad, bad, bad. I don't know what you're doing here, DEI consultant, but everyone feels uncomfortable now.
And great, let's enjoy it, let's embrace it, because it's only going to get more uncomfortable
Yeah.
from here.
But then it will gradually
It will.
be more, people will develop the muscle
Yes.
memory to deal with the discomfort.
Yes.
They will. I've seen it.
And move through it.
Yeah.
Yes. And but I also think too, now it also enhances resilience. So when, let's say something rocks the boat, you know, right? Like we went through a pandemic in 2020, who knows what happens in the future that rocks the organization, they'll be more resilient.
Exactly.
They'll be able to push through because they've dealt with their crap internally. I think it's funny how we're talking. I realize a lot of the work that needs to be done at an organization is very similar to personal development,
Yep.
right? Like you got to figure out like internally what's going on before you really focus so much on the external, because as you and I know, you only have so much control over that, but you can do a whole lot more and have a lot more abundance and achieve success, whatever that means to you, if you get all these things smoothed out with your workplace culture, DEI training or leadership coaching or whatever they're trying to do. You can do a lot more awesome crap in the world if you get all that cleaned up. And that's kind of my motto. You know, you got to clean that shit up if you want to go out there and do some cool stuff in the world, because it's going to be hard if you got all this baggage and mess, and you're trying to, you know, if you're a nonprofit, you're trying to go out there and make an impact, right? It's really difficult to do that day in and day out, year after year, if it's really difficult to just be with your coworkers or get through the day-to-day grind, right?
Yeah. And I'm thinking about burnout and also noticing we're going to end at 12:45 in case you're watching. So we got 5 more minutes. I'd like to get into burnout a little bit because it makes me think of that.
Yeah.
And just how much workplace culture, it feels like any nonprofit I've been a part of, it had a cultural norm of burnout, that we knew that this place is going to overwork us. But because the mission is so amazing and we're helping young people or we're helping adults or we're doing this, then that's just something we're going to accept. And I feel like that, I don't know, I didn't quite figure out a solution to mitigate for it. It ultimately led me to branch out on my own because I kept running into it. What do you think about that?
That's a good one. So let me make sure I rephrase what you're saying. Are you talking about burnout culture, but at an organization that has this amazing mission, and how do you struggle and balance between that, right?
Like how do you change that norm of burnout within a workplace culture?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different levels to burnout. As a now business owner, entrepreneur, I'm looking at burnout very differently now than I did working for someone else. So I think there's 3. I'm gonna try to see if I can remember a number, so you're gonna have to hold me to it. So there's a few things. I'm gonna say 3 things. I think each individual has to figure out how they handle stress, how they in their day-to-day life, because workplace, like when you're stressed in general and then you have a job or work that's very stressful, sometimes it's hard to remember which one's which and what causes what. And you have to be able to have that, I don't know, grace and self-love with yourself to go to an employer and say, I know you want these things for me. I know you have these expectations. I know I have this stuff, but right now, this is what I'm able to produce for you. Is that okay? We can check in, whatever, like have that space to talk through that. But then you have a different layer of when it's just expected for you to work overtime and get the job done because you got to get it done. You have these crazy deadlines because that's what now you have to look at, okay, how do we want to function? And is this sustainable? Is this really worth it to be working, 60-hour weeks when you're scheduled to only work 40? And instead of someone saying, well, let's slow down. Can we slow down? Do we have to pump all these things out at one time? Is there room for more space? And I think that that's really where that's how burnout keeps going is because no one says, let's slow down. Let's look at something. Maybe maybe this person could really take some time to, I don't know. Like, I think that people just keep going and going and going as if we're robots and we just keep going. Right.
Right. And that happens when people are asked to work overtime, but also within the time. Like, I think about my sisters who both have 8 to 5s, and that should be the 40-hour work week. But the amount that's the mental labor is the other part of it. People think burnout is just because of the job. But are you asking people to deal with multiple strains on the psyche? Angry customers on top of paperwork, on top of systems that are freezing because of the Wi-Fi? Like, because all of those things together, like you're saying, I feel like there's like mental burnout and there's complete exhaustion. There's physical burnout if your job is physically demanding. There's emotional burnout. There's all these different angles of it.
Yeah. And I think that most places just don't look at that the same. A lot of folks, when they think of burnout, they just think, oh, you're stressed, you're tired, no, there's multiple layers to it. And I think that having an organization that's willing to figure that out with you, and willing to come up with some solutions, and encouraging time off, encouraging vacations, encouraging breaks, encouraging no tech, encouraging no emails after you're off. Don't you check? I used to yell at people, don't check your emails. Like even one of my colleagues, I sent her a voice message after 5, and I know that after 5 she's done. I said, don't you listen to it. Don't you look at it until you're in the office. So I think that it starts with those and boundaries, right? Being okay. For instance, I know we have to wrap up here, but I was listening to one of my friends give a talk about nonverbal communication and she was giving an example about a deadline and how different ways you could say that. But I also thought you could also ask, is this an appropriate deadline? Do you need a week or do you need 2 weeks?
Yep.
Can we check in on Friday and see where you're at? Like, there's more to that. And I think that looking at it that way can help burnout,
Yeah, it's like systemically things need to change. How much work people are asked to do, how much they're getting paid, how often they have to work, and then individually. So I feel like the thing that we're both getting to also which is why I'm trying to focus my coaching on individuals, because I'm like, how do you expect to sustain yourself in a job if you don't know how to advocate for yourself? Because the more women of color I meet, I'm like, I love y'all. Y'all are the dopest. You're carrying so much on your back, but you didn't say anything. Like, you're like, oh, well, yeah, I told them I could get it done by next week. And I'm like, but why? You can't. So it's both need to happen. Systemic
simultaneously,
and individual transformation and empowerment.
Yes.
Look at that, we did it. The first one. High five. Boom. Okay, let's end with a checkout. And then next week we'll talk about leadership.
We kind of hinted at
it. The big L word that everybody uses as like an umbrella, and you never know who they're talking about, even though everybody knows who they're talking about. I always think that's odd to me, that we're just okay to use the umbrella term leadership.
I agree. Stay tuned for more.
Stay tuned for more. Okay. So to end, let's do a checkout. And I want to do like a key takeaway for the people in case they didn't watch the whole thing and they're just like, tell me the takeaway about workplace culture. So Tissa, what is the one thing you want the people to know if they take away anything?
Watch the whole thing. No. I think workplace culture, there's a lot of different elements. Defining what that looks like for your organization, and also understanding that psychological safety is a foundation for a healthy workplace culture. There you go. Perf.
Foundation for healthy workplace culture. Okay, for me, my takeaway is workplace culture. You got to have a vision to sell the systemic change that needs to happen. You got to have a heartfelt vision that everyone is on board of in order for any workplace culture shifts to take place. Okay, thank you for tuning in. We will see you next Thursday.
Bye.
And let me take us off live. This is